Hello and welcome to the Husband Help Haven podcast, where you will learn how to be the best husband you can be, no matter what your marriage is like right now. This is your host, Stephen Waldo, and today I am joined by Marcus Farris, a peace and control graduate, to talk with me about his experience going through infidelity, separation, and eventually divorce. Marcus, thank you for being here with me today. How are you doing?
Thanks, Stephen. Doing great.
Very good. And, we were just mentioning about how this is the first kind of interview that I'm doing on this podcast. And a little bit surprising because the outcome of your separation was not reconciliation, it was divorce. And that might be a little strange to think that there can be encouragement to be had from this, but I guess that's going to be kind of what we talk about. So I guess, before we get too deep into the weeds here, why don't we just take a step back here? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Who is Marcus Farris? Where are you located at? What do you do outside of talking on podcasts? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama. Graduated from Auburn University back in 2012 with a commission in ROTC, and was an active duty Army officer as an engineer for about a little over 4 years. I was stationed up in Alaska, 2 years in Anchorage, and 2 years up in Fairbanks. That's when I had met my first wife. And after that term of service was over, I kind of took a little break in the middle there and started heading down to the Pacific Northwest. I knew that I wanted to kind of be out here long term. Like, the South is a wonderful place to have grown up, but for me personally, not a place I necessarily want to move back to. Don't tell the rest of my family.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool out here. So I made my way down to Bend, Oregon. I'm in the Army Reserves right now. And this is a story that could take up a whole other podcast, but I got linked up with a company called Mission 22 that does work with veterans with post-traumatic stress. And
Oh, wow.
It was actually interesting. So one of the products of the breaking down of that first relationship was I got really interested in psychology. I got really interested in, like, how could a person go from what I thought was what I thought they were to, like, suddenly an emergence of something latent that I didn't see or perceive happened. Like, how could that happen?
Right.
And so that actually got me into kind of studying mythology, studying psychology, studying various faith traditions of how to deal with things that collapse and fall apart. And so what was really cool about all that is that as I was kind of working through that and learning what it means to live well with a broken heart, that translated perfectly, well, almost perfectly, it wasn't combat trauma, but into the work that I'm doing now. And so what I found is that when your heart breaks, it gives a lot more surface area for future empathy for others who are going through similar things or other types of trauma. So that's kind of my day job now, between working for Mission 22, writing books apparently, and doing my reserve work out of Portland there. That's kind of where I am now. So I live in Central Oregon, pretty close to Mount Bachelor here. So it's a pretty nice spot.
Yeah. Yeah. I knew that you were Pacific Northwest. I had not realized that you were born in Alabama. So that I'm connecting the dots between the Southern drawl and the geographic location that I knew you inhabited. Yes. Very good. And there was one other thing I was gonna thank you for your service. I had not realized that you were part of the Army until I had read through your book. So thank you for your service. I really appreciate what you do and your sacrifice that you're making. And helping veterans with PTSD, no light task there. I mean, that's a dire need. So I am encouraged to hear that you're out there tackling it, and no doubt that what you've learned from what you've gone through is going to help you in that. One other thing I did want to get out of the way up front, you've probably heard us already allude to it. Marcus is a Christian. I myself am a Christian. This is, for us, a conversation that we're having about what he went through. And I would like Marcus to have the freedom to be able to talk about it however he wishes, in the way that is most natural and genuine for him. So I'm just going to give you all a heads up. You can be a Christian, not a Christian. That's your prerogative. We are going to be talking as two Christian men to each other and are going to be unfiltered in that. So I wholly believe this is going to be a helpful conversation to anybody who's going through separation or divorce or infidelity, but just wanted to give you, the listener, a heads up. And also, Marcus, reaffirm that you have the freedom to talk openly about whatever it is that you want to talk about here today. And so I guess with that out of the way, why don't we just start with wherever you think is the best place to start? Maybe just a little brief a bit about, how did you and your wife meet? How did that relationship look like? and then a little bit more detail about the separation. I know there was infidelity and eventually divorce, but why don't we start with how did you meet? What did that look like?
Yeah, when I was going through college, I was that kid that, well, I had a really hard time in, let's say, the romantic department.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out of college, like I'd never had a girlfriend. I had uh, battled with a lot of just like internal dialogue of why that is. Like there must be some insufficiency about me, and it was getting to a point where it was really dragging on me. And I knew that it was not the case that my value and worth was dependent on a woman's response, although it certainly seems that way sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I contended with that when I got up to Anchorage and just realized like, this is not a healthy way to live. And I got to a point where I made a decision of like, look, you have to get this despair voice out of your head. And I kind of confronted it on this little retreat I went on there in Anchorage. And literally within the next month is when I met her. And so it just seemed like, man, something's really clicking here. And so long story short, she ended up moving to Fairbanks, and I asked for a reassignment to go up there because I fancied her quite a lot.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Right. And so it's not common that the military allows you to shift duty stations mid-tour. So I was like, tours are typically 3 years. I was about 2 years into my tour in Anchorage, and sure enough, they had an opening up in Fairbanks. To be fair, not many people request to go to the nation's coldest, military installation. So so I ended up working for the Corps of Engineers up there. We got married up there within, what was it, about 10 months after we had first met. And one of the things I kind of talk a little bit about in the book is just that there were a lot of, for me, what seemed like indications of like this was sort of meant to be, right? And I had a couple of hesitations just because both of us had very different backgrounds with our faith and what that looked like. And so I had a little bit of trepidation with that. She had been in a previous marriage, and that's kind of another story. And so I was just kind of trying to reconcile, like, okay, I have this sort of like version of this framework of understanding what marriage is supposed to look like, and my understandings as like this kid that grew up in the Bible Belt. But on our wedding ceremony day, I remember seeing this. We were in Port Angeles, Washington, and riding around. We had brought our bikes, and we were riding around the city. And the day before, I think they had some like 5K or some race, something like that, where people had like written in sidewalk chalk all over the place, just like, go team or whatever, and encouraging them to run faster. And lo and behold, apparently there was a couple there who had our same names, which were kind of obscure together. It's not like, Jane and John or whatever. Like, and so I saw sidewalk chalk on the ground, and it was like, oh, okay, I don't, this is a sign from, I might as well see something in the clouds. So right. I'm on the right track here.
Yep. And so a bit of a kind of a whirlwind romance is kind of what it sounds like. Married within 10 months there. I guess that's not that whirlwind. It's a bit whirlwind there. And then you're married, and where are you living when you're married? Did you guys stay in Alaska? Did you move to back?
Yeah, it was in Fairbanks.
Fairbanks
yeah.
Okay.
So we had a house in Fairbanks, and we were there for another about year and a half, 2 years before we moved south.
Okay. And then how long were you married before things kind of took a downward turn there?
It was right at the 4-year mark. Almost exactly at the 4-year mark, actually. Yeah.
And so, there was infidelity on her part. When were you alerted to that? Did you see any signs, or was this something that you didn't find out about until she told you?
Well, it was the latter, but it was very soon after. There was definitely a lead-in where I would say about 2 months prior to what happened, she was going through some really, really severe, just like existential conundrums. Like she had gotten to a point where basically she was telling me I learned later, not at the time, but she told me like, I felt like my only options were to not live anymore or have an affair to get out of this relationship. And the reason for that, in part, this was kind of the thing that I was trying to unpack and unravel. Partly it was a codependency issue, and that was one of her coping strategies from long ago, was just like go from relationship to relationship. I was too naive to like be able to ask or understand or interpret some of these things, and so I was just really confused. Like she started to resent like our going to church. Like our biggest fights would be like right after the service, which was really weird. And so it turned out that there are a lot of things that she kind of played along with. And I'm not trying to sit here and just like castigate the series of events that led her to make those decisions, because people are complex, and actually write quite a bit about that in the book. But yeah, I would say about 2 months out, things like, it was just like, something is just not right here.
Yeah.
And so for whatever it was worth, I knew it wasn't a case of her just like straight up falling out of love with me and, you know, totally rejecting me. It was some like internal turmoil that was a product of kind of her past and some things that she had gone through and never really brought to the surface.
So kind of born out of an identity crisis is kind of an accurate way to say that, for sure. And so she initiates this affair, by her own admission later, as her sort of ticket out of the marriage. She comes to you and just tells it to you openly, you know, hey, just so you know, I'm having an affair. What did that look like? Was it, you know, she just felt so guilty? What was going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine the weight on her conscience of that. Yeah, well, what was particularly tough for me to process through was like, I knew the other guy. He was actually a teammate of mine that I allowed to come into my home and spend the night for an event that was in town. And so he didn't live in town, but the sort of components of the affair, I guess, lasted a while in terms of communication. I'll just put it that way. But that was definitely like, I would discover like stuff in the mail, right? That would come from him. I shared this in the group actually, and the one little bit of humor I got out of that season was he had sent a pair of Christmas cards, one to her and one to my roommate. And I had the guy's number because initially we were, you know, supposed to be friends. And so I texted him, I was like, where's my Christmas card? Like, that's rude.
No response to that, I'm assuming.
No.
So you discover infidelity, obviously just world upending revelation. How did you deal with that initially? I mean, what was she wanting to move out immediately? Was she content to kind of stay in the home together? I mean, what was going through your head there, and what did you kind of do with that in the immediate aftermath?
Yeah, well, she ended up in the immediate aftermath. She ended up moving into a place across town because the only thing she could ever say was like, I need space. Okay. And so I kept trying to initiate conversation with her to figure out like what on earth is going on here. And that was really the only response I got. It was between I need space and projecting onto me like all of the terrible ways that I'm a terrible bad person. And so we ended up, we sort of shared the same house up to the point where we had an event that was in Nice, France, which was the 70.3 half Ironman World Championships. And I was kind of hoping that might be some type of revivification of the relationship. And really it just kind of more or less turned out to be a farewell tour. And so right after that trip, basically I ended up moving to, like, anytime we were together in the home, it was just like lots of negative energy, and it was extraordinarily emotionally exhausting. So I had some friends in town that I just ended up moving into with, because I figured it would be kind of a temporary thing. She was going to see a therapist, to her credit, just trying to figure out, you know, what was going on with herself, because she used the word confused quite a lot too, and that was another one that for me I was just like, what are you confused about? I don't understand this. Yeah, and then I ended up, I read a book called Severe Mercy. Another thing that the way I responded was just like, I read so much, man. Like for probably over the course of a year, I read a book every 2 weeks, just trying to like get into what's going on. And one of the books I read was called A Severe Mercy. And it was by one of C.S. Lewis's friends who goes through the relationship that he had. And at an early age, his wife got cancer and passed away. And so I kind of had a severe mercy where I got a job in Portland in kind of the midst of all of this. So the majority of my separation was spent over there, where I could kind of focus on what my job is now. And that job ended up moving back to Central Oregon. So I kind of anyway, so
Did a flippity flop there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
So give me a little bit of timeline. You're married. What year is it that you're married? That you got married the first time?
2015.
2015. Separation is it September of 2019?
Yes.
September 2019. The separation. So that's when she tells you about the affair. How long is the separation between that and the divorce?
It was right about a year. Yeah. So I found out about what happened in middle of July, and then it was September when I decided to move in with some friends. That in itself was a decision that was motivated by the fact that those friends were a huge help to me in that time, and I kind of needed some tender loving care.
Yeah.
And so then, yeah, September up through August, and I probably saw her twice in that time period. And then she ends up filing and leaving town, and that was that.
Yeah. And as far as you knew, the affair continued throughout that entire separation, or did it end at some point in there?
As far as I know, it was only communication that happened after when I had first found out. Okay. I found out later that she opened up to me about it a little bit, and how like she finally got to a point where she cut off communication. And I think that's all that had gone down since the initial revelation of what happened. And she just told me, she was just like, I'm dealing with so much shame every single time that's coming through. And so again, to her credit, like almost that entire time, I found out later she was going to therapy to like figure this out, because it was an issue that first kind of came about long before we had met. Yeah. So this was something else I write about in the book, is like trying to learn not to take this personally was monumentally difficult, but the only tool for me to be able to move on without feeling as though the world is out to get me personally. Right. It's a product. It was really a product of some trauma that she, like legitimate trauma that she had experienced, that she did not open up to me about until much later on.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So you at least weren't enduring infidelity for that and for the entire separation there, but very little contact for the whole thing. Does that sound about right?
Yeah. And there were, I really like, for a while there, I was desperate just to hear anything from her, like to have just give me a single text where I don't initiate the conversation. That's something that trends positively. I think our last actual date was December 2019. I think we had gone to see one of the new Star Wars, and that was like I had already moved to Portland, but it was just like that was sort of like the final like, is there any possibility we could sort of make this work and sort it out? And yeah.
Okay, interesting. So you're kind of hit with this big bomb of infidelity, and it takes, I mean, was there at any point in there that you felt like you kind of turned a corner on how you were dealing with the separation? Or, I mean, was the struggle pretty linear? Was it up and down? How, like on your end, for how you were dealing with it, what would you kind of frame that as? How would you describe that journey?
Man, that's a really good question. I found out about the Peace and Control course in the first cohort, which I believe came out around November 2019. It was like very timely for me. And so I ended up going back south where my family was for a good like 3 weeks, because I needed to get away and like be with family. They didn't really know what was going on. It was sort of a need to know type of thing at that point. I remember very distinctly the Iron Bowl, which is the rivalry between Auburn and Alabama, was at Auburn that year. And my brother was in town. He lives in Burbank, and we don't see each other often. But I had come back for Thanksgiving, and we ended up getting tickets to that game from a family member who just happened to give them to us. And Auburn ended up winning. It was just an incredible game. And I remember like I needed that so bad, because I was in such a cloud for so long to like be with family and going back to my university. It was like I had gone back to like a huddle right in between plays.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was, I guess it was kind of linear. There was a long time there where I had a lot of good mentors who didn't really tell me how to act, but just were trying to tell me how to process all this and things to consider. And I had to get myself to the point where I needed to face like, hey, you know what, like it's probably like divorce is probably going to be the better option here. And for me, growing up a Christian, I just like, how in the world could that be God's will? How could that be what my next step is? Like, there's no way, like, it can't be that way. But then I had to contend with like, okay, that's what you say you believe. But if you look at the situation, like if you were to
this way, yeah.
Right. So there was, I was blessed with a job that I really enjoyed. It was very good for me to be in a different city at that time to kind of do my own processing. Definitely a lot of just worship. You know what? That was Job's response, right? In the book of Job, right? Like all of the things befall him. And his first response was just worshiping God and not blaming the creator for something a human had done. And worship there's an interesting utility to worship. And it's like, it's occupying a space between what you know about God and what you don't know about God and how he operates. And I found a lot of healing in that. Again, this was all paired with a lot of reading, a lot of mentorship, a lot of hard physical exercise with a group of friends that I made there in Portland who met pretty regularly. And acceptance was a long process. Accepting that divorce was maybe the best outcome here was really tough for me to wrap my head around. Like, gosh, I probably, even after the divorce was finalized, it was still just like, it probably took me another couple of months to finally just be like, okay, I'm actually moving on with this. It's finished.
Yeah. So kind of like separate phases of the separation that you had to go through, which is first kind of letting go of her, but then also letting go of, all of it, the entire relationship, not just her, but the marriage as a whole, and just kind of really digging deep into that kind of two separate things. I really like what you kind of highlighted there. And this is one of the things that you do talk about in the book, is just that, one of the things that marriage does for us is it gives us that sort of micro community within the walls of our own home, which is a beautiful thing. And really the marriage, the family is the building block of a society at large. And yet that I like that you pointed out that you sought out community, even in the midst of separation, and really taught yourself that while the community that you get in your own marriage and that sense of fellowship that you get in your own marriage is unique and it's special and it's to be treasured, that's not to say that there's no community elsewhere in life or in the world. And so going to your family, going to your brother, going to the game, going, to work, to work out with your friends. I really liked you pointing that out as kind of scratching that particular itch for you and kind of meeting that need really for you to have community, and just seeing that, being able to kind of isolate out the things that marriage does for you in your life and kind of saying, okay, well, part of it is it gives me friendship. Part of it is it gives me romance. Part of it is it gives me community and it gives me social involvement and things like that. And kind of saying, okay, well, maybe I can't get this romance part, but I can still get friendship from other places. I can get community from other places. I can be loved and be supported from other places. And that just being kind of a hard lesson, being content with it not being what you thought it would be, but still kind of getting the same things in the end. I mean, do you think that that's an accurate way of, am I portraying what you kind of outlined there properly?
Yeah. And that was one of the things that I've had to contend with even to today, to a degree, is like after having experienced the sort of romantic part of it, and then for that to be just taken away from you, it's like, how important is that component of community in my particular mission? And I had to be content with, well, I say that as if this was like second rate or something, but like I had to be content with the group of guys in the tribe that I was a part of. But I really learned on a much deeper level what the nature of community means, what it really means to have have relationships with other people, and that new life can be had when people come together. So like, with in Genesis, it talks about like, it's not good for man to be alone. And we immediately think like, oh, that means a man needs to be with a wife. Like, no, yes, but what it also means is like, it's not good for humans to be apart from each other. And when two become one, it generates new life. Now, I don't have to explain to anyone how that works in marriage, but that also works with deep friendships. When two become one, i.e., when multiple people come together in a community, there's life there. It gives life. Isolation kills us.
Yeah, and I really like that. And you kind of talk about the intangible life that's brought forth just in relationship, and that it's something extra that takes place that's different than when it's just two people separately, two people together. There's that extra ingredient that you can't quite measure in a bottle or measure in a beaker, but you just know that it's there. It's the relationship, right? Yeah, and I think so. Yeah, I like that you kind of highlighted that community and kind of making yourself get out of your comfort zone a little bit and be a little bit outgoing and seeking community. But also you kind of mentioned being content with the mystery of it. And especially for Christians, I think this is something that, I mean, it's just inevitably one of the things that you come to, which is that dichotomy between the goodness of God and the pain in this world and the pain of suffering. And there are ways, and you wrestle with, I mean, that's really kind of what this book was about as I was reading, is just making sense of that and wrestling with that and dealing with that. But ultimately, part of that, there is understanding to be had, and you can make sense of things, and you can see the goodness in suffering, or the goodness that comes from suffering, the life that comes after death. But also there's a sense where you can just say, I don't get it all the way. And that's okay, because I can still trust that what's happening is what needs to happen. And I really like that. And I think I like the way that you put that. And I think you mentioned that just a second ago here too, as being one of the things that you had to kind of get to in yourself. Yeah, tough place to get to, but helps ease that anxiety in your head about things. Yeah, exercise being another big thing that you kind of called out as helping you process. Are there any other things that kind of stand out that really helped you survive the separation part?
Yeah, well, I think writing itself was something that really helped me get through. There's a lot of power in putting things to written word. As the saying goes, the devil can be slain with a flick of a pen. And just being able to unravel all of the gunk that was building up in my head by just putting things to written word was really powerful. This is actually a very deep mythological trope, and actually, like, you can see it in the book of Genesis, right? Creation is made through speech. And for us, as being made in the image of God, we have that same power. We can create things by what we say, right? And so you can create a good relationship by the things you speak to your spouse, or you can tear down by the things that you speak. And I think the things that are most real in life or most important to us are those relationships, and those relationships are built by what we say. Yeah. And we have relationships with ourselves too, right? Like I thought a lot about this idea of like, you can have a dialogue with yourself. Like, what do you mean a dialogue? Dialogue is between two people. How do you have that with yourself? Well, humans are complex and are composed of many multi-personalities, depending on how you want to construe it. But yeah, what really, really helped me put things into words, I would do two things. One, I would just go for long walks out in the sun. I was furloughed for a little while. You can guess why, in the summer of 2020. And I would just, if I wasn't listening to a podcast, I would just speak. It was just like, I'm speaking out to God of like, what's going on. And I never came to a conclusion, right? Like it was just flow of, here are my feelings. Here's trying to understand this and that. And it wasn't as if at the end of those walks, it was like, okay, now I figured out I'm very mechanically minded or mathematically minded. And I never had like a solution to the equation or whatever, because it's not an equation. Right. So there was that. And then there was just like long form journaling. That's unbelievably cathartic to put things down onto work, because then you get it out of your head and onto the page. Yeah. And I obviously did a lot of that, because that's kind of what the book turned into. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like that. And I remember that standing out to me too when you're talking about that, because you have a chapter in here where you talk through kind of specific things. I think it's you call it first aid. And it's where you kind of say, okay, well, here are the specific things that I did that helped me, and I'm passing them on to you that maybe they'll help you too. And yeah, one of those things was having a conversation with yourself, basically. And this is actually something that I do, and I had never, I have done similar things like that to process through grief and hard things. I also find myself doing it more often just for like organizing life in general. Sometimes I just get so tangled up in my head and just so many different areas of life to manage that I just have to go out and have a conversation with myself and kind of hold my own personal meeting with myself where I say, okay, hold on, let's just take a break here and say, okay, we're going to talk through this thing. Me and myself are going to talk through this, and then we're going to talk through this, we're going to talk through this, and it's all going to make sense. I just have to get it out. I have to talk about it with somebody. And even if that's just me, and so I really, kind of clung onto that and resonated. That one resonated with me a lot. And I like the way that you kind of described doing that, is that you don't have to get to that place where it makes sense. It's still helpful and healing to just get it out, and to feel like you've gotten it out, much better than just keeping it in your head. So one of the questions that always comes up when there's infidelity, and maybe this was less of a pressing question for you because the affair didn't last throughout the separation, but you mentioned that you knew this guy. Was there ever any confrontation with her affair partner? And if not, why not?
No, I mean, he lived in a city far away from me, so there was no like face to face. Yeah, that one was kind of a tough one for me because, well, he was also in the military, and in the military, that isn't an offense that can get you kicked out. And I battled back and forth with whether or not I should like open that can of worms. And like I could have absolutely flattened his career. I could have done that, and maybe that would have been the just thing to do, but it didn't feel right for me. One of the profound truths I came across is this idea that no one gets away with anything. Like it's just, we can talk about the spiritual level of like sin and the redemptive purpose of what Christ did on the cross, but you can also think of it psychologically. Like, and this is not my idea. This was just in all of my research I've been doing and just listening to psychologists talk about this topic, is when somebody comes in and is trying to unravel some cognitive, like some conscious issue that they have with like, how do I move forward in my life? They like, you can start tracing back, like, oh, when did this first start happening? And then you get back to the root of it, and it's like that initial sin or transgression. And man, I didn't really know him very well. And when, as I may have mentioned this before already, like the whole thing about hurt people, and I have no idea what his history was. And it's not a way to excuse the behavior at all, right? But it's also just like, what is it that leads a person to do things like this? And one of the routes that got me going down is realizing what Carl Jung, psychologist in the 19th and 20th century, talks about. He talks about this idea of the shadow, and there are a lot of ways to construe it. You might think about it as like the fleshly nature, or the ego desire, or that part of you that like wants to take for yourself the fruit of the forbidden tree. And I had to realize within myself too that the war here, I guess, wasn't between me and them. It was to realize, well, at least part of it was to realize like, hey, you're a human too. Humans are capable of reprehensible things. So how do you reconcile that within yourself? Since I couldn't confront him or her, I tried to send him a few texts, and there was like, radio silence, big surprise. And so then I just had to realize, like, as much as that hurt, like I will probably never see him again. I may never see her again. I may never speak to either of them again. I may never get an apology from either of them. And I have to live with that. And that was the thing that I had to settle in my heart of like, okay, if I continue to choose to take this personally, I'm going to continue to allow the thing that was first done to me to hurt me continually. And that's on me at that point. That's on me because I'm not letting that go. Like it's one of the things that I battled with was this idea of like what it means to not take something personally. And because like it certainly doesn't
Feels
feel
very personal. It's your wife and it's an affair, and it's, yeah, hard not to take that personally. What did help you kind of get to that point where you could let go of that as being a personal hurt against you?
right. Yeah. So well, two things. One was some really great mentorship I had with
Mm-hmm.
someone who ended up hiring me. And he just talks, he's been through combat trauma, all sorts of betrayals, worse things than I can ever imagine. And this was a thing that he taught me, was like, people don't do things personally. It's not because of you that they acted out that way, even if they try to blame you for it. And when they do, that crosses a threshold into abuse at some point, to try to, like, it's your fault that I did this terrible thing to you.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like you start to believe that when it's with an intimate partner, right? Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
maybe, women are very good at making men self-conscious about things. And so,
Yes.
and so in that season, it was just like, I must be a dirtbag because I was being blamed for a lot of stuff. And so,
Mm-hmm.
but then, yeah, I had to go back and find my center to, like, obviously, yeah, sure. Like, all of us men have things to improve. And,
Yep.
and I wanted to look into, like, okay, what, if anything, was sort of my contribution to this, other than just like straight up naivety? Like, how do I need to grow up here? But the journey to not take things personally, there's a great book called The Four Agreements by, I think, Don Miguel Ruiz is the author.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the four agreements is like, don't take things personally. Like, and indeed, it's not done personally. The conclusion that I drew there, and this is a tough one, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's tough to tell somebody who has gone through that type of abuse or betrayal, it's not because of you. Like, I can't say that enough. Like, it's not because of you. And so the way I kind of conceptualized it was like, if you have kids playing out on a playground and one of the kids, cuts in line in front of the other, they have a choice there. Like, if it's done personally, then it makes sense for them to get even with the other child. So then they cut back in line.
Mm-hmm.
But then name one time in the history of humanity where a human tried to get even with another human, and the other person who was on the receiving end of that was like, okay, the scales are balanced now, we're good
now. Yeah.
Like, it's too complex. And that's why you have to give up the component of getting even to God, who knows the complexity of the human heart.
Well, that's interesting, because at that point, it's like you're taking something that, you go back to that analogy of the kids in the playground. You have one kid who cuts to the front of the line. Well, it wasn't really about the kid who was at the front of the line. It wasn't a personal attack against them. They just wanted to be at the front of the line. But then when the kid who was at the front of the line does something in retaliation, now what was impersonal has become personal, because the kid who was offended is doing a personal revenge against the person who impersonally cut in line. Which is, so yeah, I think that's a nice way of describing how revenge or that sort of line of thinking, that sort of track there, doesn't actually fulfill what you hope it might fulfill initially in your sort of gut urge. Yeah, and I also like there that that whole concept just touches on something that I talk about a lot, especially with men who've been through infidelity, and also with men who are dealing with a wife who's going through that sort of identity crisis, which is, one of the things that we hit a lot on Husband Help Haven is taking responsibility, because the only person you can control is yourself. So of course it makes sense to start by looking at all the things that you can control, both historically and planning for the future and in today. But the danger there is that you don't want to take on so much that it becomes impossible to get out of that place that you're talking about, where you're taking it personally and it's all because of you. You don't want to get it. It's very easy to cross that line from taking responsibility into pity party, And so I try to say, take the right amount of responsibility. You want to have an accurate amount of responsibility, the part that's truthful to what you are actually responsible for, but not any more than that. Because and then you come into the realm of forgiveness and kind of letting go and things like that. So it sounds like that's kind of the journey that you went through here. I mean, is that kind of ring true with you?
Yeah, and that was something that I believe you talked about in the Peace and Control course that settled in for me is, what can I do with my life right now that things have completely fallen apart? I'll tell you a quick story. I had been working at this company for about 4 months, and 3 months in is when I found out about the affair, and I was a complete mess at work. I didn't tell my employers what had happened. By the way, that might be something you consider doing, because I was like less than a functioning human being at that point and was barely holding it together. Right before the trip to France that I'd mentioned before, I got a phone call from them, and basically they were like, "Hey, you don't work here anymore." So it's like, great, cool. I've lost a job. I've basically lost this relationship. I'm about to go to France on a trip that could be a disaster. But within 5 minutes of that phone call, like literally 5 minutes, I got in the mail my welcome packet to a health coaching course I had been taking at the time. A course that I had started taking back in May before all of this happened. And it was one of those things, like, she didn't really support me in that, but that's another story. But it was just like, I knew on my heart, like, I need to press into this. And fast forward about 2 years later, I just finished the level 2 portion of that course, and now I'm coaching other coaches within the context of the job I talked about before. So, it was like the image of, like, if you've ever been to a Christmas Eve service, like they have the candles and then like the entire room's blacked out. And in that moment that I heard that I got fired, and then I received my welcome packet, it was like, I have this one candle and everything else seems dark. But I can tell you that I never felt like I was at a moment, no matter how, like, you could cut the darkness with a knife, it was so thick around me at times. But there never ceased to be that candle if I was willing to pay attention.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful story. Well, as we're sort of wrapping up here, I know we could probably talk a lot longer than would be appropriate for a podcast here. Let me just finish. I'd like to talk about your book a little bit before we get into that. Real quick. Well, actually, a couple of things. First off, I guess in retrospect, how would you rate your own preparation for divorce during separation? Do you wish that you'd been more prepared for it, or like kind of dealt with it earlier in terms of setting expectations? Do you felt that you were pretty well on target for what, you didn't really let yourself settle into that being the outcome until you knew it was going to be the outcome? Do you wish you'd done it earlier, later? I mean, you kind of get what I'm asking here. What would you kind of rate yourself as doing there?
Well, one of the things that I was having a hard time with, I would say, so August of last year is when it was legally finalized. The March, April before that, I remember giving myself, like, and this was like, as I was kind of digesting a lot of the peace and control concepts, it's like, I need to set a date that, like, if there doesn't seem to be any amelioration of the situation, like, I need to go ahead and file, because this is just, it's taking such a toll from me.
Yeah.
I didn't have the stomach to do it. Pandemic stuff aside, like, I was trying to just figure out, like, where my life was going at that point. And I had accepted that as an outcome, but it was, maybe if I had gone back and told myself to do anything differently, it would be maybe some details on, like, how things were split up and that sort of thing. But it was so apparent from the intermittent conversations that we had on the phone that she decided over a year ago that the marriage was done. And it was just like, to say that it was hanging on by a thread is to suggest that something was still hanging on. And that thing was my unwillingness to do the filing. And I mentioned the term severe mercy before. And I think, like, for her to have gone through with all of that herself, I think probably was appropriate, because it seems to me that, like, she had made that decision already. So if she was the one that made that decision there, then she also needed to be the one to do the legal portion. Maybe that's debatable, but.
Did you tell her that? I mean, was that a conversation that you guys had?
That she needed to be the one to do that?
Yeah, that she needed to file.
Not directly. I mean, we had talked about what that would look like, and there was still that we had figured out a plan of what it would look like. But in my head, I was still thinking, like, is she actually going to go through with this? Because it still to me almost seemed unbelievable that would happen. But yeah, like I said, man, like, accepting that as a possibility is what was a long, drawn out process, and being ready to, like, move on from that was something that I dealt with for many, many long nights.
Yeah. So, I mean, and just to kind of catch us up to speed with where you're at today, divorce has been finalized for, I guess, a few months now. Is that right? And
yeah, it depends on how you look at, like, like the substance of the marriage was basically dissolved about 2 years ago,
Right.
right? Like there,
Mhm.
so for me, like mentally, 2020 was, quite a decade, you know what I mean? And
Right.
for
Yeah.
more than one reason. So I feel like I have done so much, just the reading, the writing, the mentorship, the community, all of the things that helped me through that time. You know, time heals all wounds, I guess, but it depends on what you do at the time.
Yeah.
And what I did with that time was a lot of work to heal. And it was, you know, by the guidance of, of you, honestly, and the work that you did with the people I've already mentioned earlier. But yeah, it's been since August of last year, which already
Yeah.
seems unbelievably long ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, so so
So,
now I'm in my own place here in Bend, and yeah, doing
and
good work.
and no contact with her whatsoever, and you are not looking to have contact with her. Am I understanding that right as well?
Yeah, the last time we had a conversation, I guess, was New Year's Eve. This most recent New Year's Eve, which kind of seems appropriate.
Yeah.
And I will say that conversation was entirely amicable. She's not the type of person that like wishes me ill or anything like that. So I do want to say that. And so, we're on as friendly terms as you could think. We're not like at each other's throats or anything like that. So that boundary is over. So I think it's as tragic as it was. The current status is, the boundary there is like, yeah, I'm not going to reach out to her. She's doing her thing. She's in a different town, and I hope that she finds purpose and meaning in her life after what went down. And I might never find out what that is, and that's okay.
So you have, we talk about at the end of the Peace and Control course, the last module, as we're kind of talking about divorce. I mean, that's what we talk about in that module, and sort of your options after divorce. And I often encourage men, you don't need to do any of this figuring out what's next while you're separated, but after the divorce, you really need to sit down and reevaluate what you want to do in your life, and what you want to do with your wife. You're at that point ex-wife. Where are you kind of on that? Are you still doing the loyal hound thing where you're, not pursuing, but still open to a future relationship with her? Is that door fully closed for you and you're open to another marriage in the future, or you're going to be doing the single thing? I mean, if I may ask, what are you kind of on there?
It would be the doors fully closed. I mean, it's it was to the point where when I went back and kind of reevaluated really the way that the marriage started, it was I went back and looked at some of the communication that we had between each other. So I'm not sitting here blaming myself for believing the things that she said, and those feelings for her probably felt legitimate, but realizing just the extraordinary degree to which our faiths were disparate. And again, it's not for me to decide what that faith is for her or vice versa. It was like that needed to be the foundation, right? And that foundation was not there to the degree to which I thought it was. And so for that reason, it's, as far as I know, that hasn't been established in her. And it's clear that our life paths have divided at this point.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of hits on, actually, I thought one of the most profound things that you put in this book, or one of the things I really, really liked that you said, actually has nothing to do with getting through the separation or having a good marriage or that sort of thing. But it's actually that it was and I can't remember the exact quote. I should have bookmarked it here so I could have read it for you. But it was where you're highlighting that to have a good marriage, what you really need to do is to be at peace that you don't need the marriage to survive. Go before you even get married. And that should be true for your spouse too, because otherwise you get into this relationship that's codependent and where you are relying on each other for your fulfillment. You're putting your house on sand instead of on solid rock, which is one of my favorite children's songs, little Bible songs the kids sing. And is really just rings true that you put your house on solid ground, you're going to be better suited for whatever life throws at you. And that is certainly true for marriage. So the best thing that you can do if you want to have a successful marriage comes before you even get married. And it's making sure that you aren't placing all of your self-worth on your wife and she isn't placing all of her self-worth on you. because neither of you are perfect. And at some point you're going to let the other down. And so having that sort of stability that's not reliant solely on the other person's performance, it's a good safeguard. And you talk about that, and you are more eloquent about it than I am here in the book. But yeah, and you kind of hit on that there too. In retrospect, if you're looking at just this whole kind of chapter that you went through with the separation, with the divorce, all that stuff together, and you kind of had to pick out one thing you felt you did really well, and then one thing that you would go back and do differently, what would those things be? And you can take that back as far as you want or as recent as you want, whatever. Just curious.
I would say, yeah. So something that I did well, we've kind of talked about it already, but being attentive to the ways in which a season of having a broken heart can lead into something new and reborn, right? So, I mean, this is what Christ teaches on the cross. Like, death and resurrection is for us to experience. He set the example for us. And you pray that it's not the death of a marriage, but the concept still applies even if it is. And so just trying to be attentive to the new birth that can come out of something that was so tragic is something that I think I did pretty well. Given the new like it was, God gave me a lot of like weird signs and like coincidences, doing air quotes here, of just how he was there still providing for me. And so just being attentive to the really subtle ways that he took care of me was something that I got to a point where I didn't really have any other choice. It's like, be attentive to how God's providing for you, or, wallow
be
in
desolate and alone. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. Probably something that I would have maybe changed is like right after the divorce, this is kind of another topic, but like right after the divorce, I did start looking to be in another relationship. And by that time I hadn't really felt married for over a year. Right. And so that was kind of my justification for it. And I don't really regret what I did. But there's still a lot of just like latent stuff that kept coming up. There was a lot of, so I did date a girl for a little while, and she's awesome, and we're good friends now. But like I carried what I told myself is like, hey, don't start a relationship looking for someone to heal you or like to have healing there. That's just not healthy. And so I said that, and I was like, yes, I believe it. And then, she was a very compassionate listening ear to my story, but there was still like a lot of closeness between that pain and then getting into that relationship, that, it probably would have been a lot more fruitful if from the start it was just like, I'm just looking for friendship right now, and I'm not looking for anybody to heal me. But it's hard to underestimate how deep rooted that hurt is, and that you are going to need, like, even if you feel like you've healed for a year, like that's probably not enough. And it is the case that a scar like that doesn't leave you. You just grow around it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And like that saying, time heals all wounds. But the reality is that it can kind of dampen the emotional heat of the wounds. But I mean, grief isn't linear, and it's going to come and go in waves. And I mean, I think about that with my own parents' divorce. It's like here I am 10 plus years after the fact, and still sometimes it bothers me. And it took me a lot longer than I thought it would to get to where it wasn't like a daily or weekly thing that I was thinking about or struggling with, or just like feeling down about. That took a long time, a lot longer than I thought it should have. And there were definitely windows in there where I thought I was good. And perhaps part of it is because I'm working with men going through separation, kind of picking at the scab all the time. But nonetheless, it's that grief, man. It takes a long time. It takes a long time. And even then it still can surge up on you. So you've put all this into a book, and we kind of hinted at it a little bit earlier. How did this book, and I'll hold it up for you. So it's called No Less Faithful. I really enjoyed this book. Thank you for sending me a copy. How did this come to be? I mean, how did you go from trekking through the Pacific Northwest to writing a book? And kind of what do you see the book? I kind of have an idea of what I think that the book does. I really liked it. I think it's it is actually one of the best books that I've read on dealing with divorce as a Christian. I mean, really, it just, I thought it was very genuine and also just a very dense read. If I'm being totally honest, I mean, it's just completely packed with your messy journey through that part of your life. And I thought it was very insightful. But in your words, how did this book come to be, and what do you hope it does?
Yeah, thanks for the kind words on that. The book came to be as, well, I mentioned a lot before that, like, I've been writing blog posts for a long time. Most of them have just been recounting race experiences. I was into long distance running and triathlon for a while, and I just enjoyed it. It was never, well, I had this idea that I wanted to be a published author one day. But I never thought that it would be like a topic like this. But it was, when I was first looking at what resources do I have, like I told you, I was doing a ton of reading during that season. And, I found your site and got a lot of goodness out of it. But I was also looking, like, within the context of the church specifically, I don't hear about this much. I don't hear about, like, hey, if you're in your late 20s and you're in the situation, like, what do you do? Because in the church, to some degree, it's almost as if it's like, oh, I've made it to marriage, so I'm a better Christian, right? It's almost like a status of like, oh, you married and have kids? Like, no. How old are you? Like 30. Like, you know what I mean? And so it's like, oh, I'm divorced, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you're 30 years old and you're divorced. Great. So where do I fit in with the church? How do I process this? Who do I talk to? And I mean, I love my church here. Don't get me wrong at all. Like, they're awesome. But generally speaking, in the church, it's just like, this is not. How often do you see a conversation happening of people about my age having gone through this, right? And it is so stinking pervasive. Like, I had no idea. So I wrote an initial draft of this, and it was probably like a quarter of the size, maybe. But then as I kept pressing into the topic, I found I had more to say. And again, one of my mentors was just like, you should make this into a book. And lo and behold, one of my small group members from back in Anchorage actually is an editor, and she helped me tremendously through the process of getting this to print. And where do I see it going? Well, that's a good question. I feel like I knew I had a book in me with this, and I may end up publishing some others on some different topics. But right now it's just contacting some local churches, seeing how I can maybe potentially do some like local, like the conversation that I said, like, who's talking about this? Maybe do some type of hosting a divorce recovery thing for young singles, right?
Yep.
So something along those lines, I think, would be pretty cool.
Yeah. I really am glad to hear that. And I think that you are absolutely right that this kind of reveals a hole in church culture, and that I'd say certainly that the church is more accepting of divorce than it has ever historically been, for better or for worse. Different people have different views on that. But the reintegration, I suppose, is the word I'll use there, of people who are divorced and kind of keeping them in the flock is, and teaching them what their place is. That is something that I think is missing. And I think it's why you see a lot of times, I mean, I can think of multiple people in my own church who went through divorce, and then just because it's so at odds with what you're taught about marriage just on the surface, that divorce is even an option, that infidelity is even a possibility, that two Christian people could suffer through that. And then like making sense of that, and then trying to come back to church after all that. It's daunting, and it's enough to send you spiraling. And honestly, of the people in my church that have gone through something like that, I don't know that any of them, I think all of them went to a different church afterwards, just because they didn't, at least the couple that I can, two of the couples I can think of, they ended up going to different churches, which is fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I'm glad they're going to church at all, but it's just, it kind of speaks to exactly what you're talking about there, that we just don't know how to have a conversation about it. And that's really what I liked about this book, is that it was different than if you search Google for how do Christians deal with divorce. This is different than that. It's deeper, it's more genuine, it's honest, it's it's, yeah, I just really appreciate it. And yet you still hit on all of those. It's not that it was atheological. There was plenty of theology in there, plenty of scriptural references. One of the things I really liked, and I was actually going to ask you about, you have this knack for root words. Where did that come from? There's so many times through the book you're saying, well, in the Latin, in the Greek, it means this. Where'd you pick that stuff up from?
Oh man, you know, I would credit that to the Bible Project.
Really?
For the listeners maybe not familiar with that, it's a nonprofit out of Portland actually that just does a really great job of illuminating some verses that you're maybe really familiar with, but then it's like, hey, here's the Hebrew, and this is actually a play on words on this, and it refers back to that, and it was just like, whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's where kind of my fascination of the root words came from. A lot of the root words in there were from my listenings of that podcast. That was another way that I kind of processed. It's like, let's figure out what the Bible really says about some of these things. And yeah.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, guys, go check out No Less Faithful. I really enjoyed it, and it will be something I certainly will hand out to somebody. Well, not this copy, but I'm going to keep this one for me. But we'll be encouraging folks to read who are going through this. And yeah, so thank you, Marcus, for joining me today. Anything else that I forgot to ask you that I should have asked you, or anything else that you'd like to leave us with here?
Well, you can find the book at nolessfaithfulbook.com. And on that website, there is what I termed the Love Loss Recovery series, which is just a 7-day email series of stuff that I wish I knew. So I sort of wrote 7 emails that roughly follow the stages of grief and have resources in each one of those things and links out to some of the books that I found really helpful. So that email series is available free, and you can find the book on that site.
All right, great. Well, I will be sure to put the links for that below this episode. If you're listening to this, that's husbandhelphaven.com/Marcus-interview. And that's Marcus with a C. It's MARCUS-interview. So if you can find those links there. Marcus, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. Really appreciate you being willing to be on here and tell your story. I know it's not easy to get up here and kind of bare your soul about the pain and the trauma that you've been through. So I appreciate your vulnerability.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, Stephen. And I can't understate how helpful it was to go through Peace and Control during that time. It was hugely beneficial to me.
Thank you for the kind words. Guys, everybody listening, and to you, Marcus, much manly love. Take care of yourself. We'll see you next time.